Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Onion Soup, the show where we pull back the layers of metaphysics and reality in order to demystify spirituality. And today we have a wonderful guest with us, Miss Deborah Charnes, and we're here to really talk about her book, From the Boxing Ring to the Ashrams. How are you doing today, Miss Deborah?
I'm doing wonderful. I actually feel like I want to flow after hearing that music.
Thanks. I love the when I made the intro, I was like, oh, this is the perfect beat for this. But let's that well first, what is the ashram? Can we talk about that first?
Sure. What, where, or both?
All of the above.
Well, an ashram is, for the most part, a center for study, it's usually spiritual study. And in my book, From the Boxing Ring to the Ashram, I'm talking about bigger picture, broader sense from the boxing ring, which of course connotes a lot of different things, to the ashram, which to me represents study. For me, it's ongoing study and spirituality. From a concrete standpoint, in my book, my book is about life lessons that I learned from 12 gurus of mine around the world. And a number of them live in ashrams or I met in ashrams. The first ashram that I was at, and I actually went there twice, was in Northern California. And one of the chapters features the Swami. It's a female Swami who is in charge of that center. And then I also spent time at an ashram in Italy, and I spent I did my Arguvedic studies, and one of the chapters focuses about Ayurveda based on my teacher in southern India at that ashram. And then I've also spent time at other ashrams in India, and two of my other gurus that I talk about in my book are from a different ashram in a different part of India.
When you're traveling around and you're going to the different ashrams, talking to the different gurus, what's really different about each message?
Oh, you know what? I would say each message is the same from a broad perspective. And as a yogi, my first commandment is ahimsa, nonviolence, do no harm. And what I always tell people is that ahimsa can be interpreted so many ways. And Dr. Martin Luther King was very much a follower of Mahatma Gandhi, and that was all his battle cry was ahimsa, nonviolence. So there are so many ways that you can interpret ahimsa. And one of the things that I also care about a lot, and April, Earth Day is in April, and I see so much violence against Mother Nature and our planet. And I always talk also about ahimsa for the planet. We have to respect and honor. And there's so many different things that, I mean, I could go on forever about that, but I have many different therapeutics that I offer. And my latest that I'm launching is called the Yogi Diet, and it talks about ahimsa in many different ways.
Mm. You're talking about the yogic diet. Is that dealing with the, I'm going to butcher the name that you said it, the Ayurvedic traditions?
Yes. So there are several different components. The number one component that I kind of like preface for it is introduction for those who are not familiar with yogic practices or Ayurveda, which is the life science of India, is mindful eating. And again, in today's Western society, it's horrendous. Most of us eat on the run, we eat in the car, we put something in the microwave, we eat like that. It's so quick. And I have spent a lot of time traveling. And as an example, in India, one of the things that I talk about is the practice called mona, and it's silence when you eat. And the concept of silence when you eat is so that you can tune up all of your senses to not only savor, but smell, touch, the food, so that you really a much more mindful approach. And the other thing that I like to talk about a lot of times is in Europe, because I've spent a lot of time in Europe, and I think we know that some parts of Europe, like France in particular, they're very particular about their food. And I'm not going to say that they don't have fast food, they do. But it's very common for people to sit at a meal for an hour. And for us in the West, we're like, time is precious, as opposed to my food is precious or my body is precious. So that's why mindfulness is a very important part of the yogi diet. But I do talk about ahimsa, nonviolence. And as an example, I mentioned, Gandhi and MLK, and MLK's widow, Coretta, as well as one of his sons, Dexter, they were both vegetarian because of ahimsa. And to me, I've been vegetarian most of my life, but I took my vegetarian level up a notch. I became vegan when I found out about the horrible cruelty in most dairy farms and eggs, the way most eggs in the West are made. And again, it's so different from how my ancestors would have had dairy or eggs. And again, I've lived in other countries. It's very different how it's done in many other countries. And at the ashrams that I've been to in India and in Italy, they have a number of cattle, dairy cows, and they sing to their cows, and their cows just produce a tiny amount of milk because, you know, they're treated, they're normal cows as opposed to being flooded with hormones and impregnated time after time. So the amount of milk that they get is a very small amount, and that's very precious to them. And that's considered ahimsa dairy. So it's dairy that's non-violent, as opposed to how most of the dairy farms in the United States are.
Interesting. When you talk about the importance of food in your diet and really paying attention to it, it's funny because I actually love to cook. And I always say that presentation is everything. You eat with your eyes first. And I always try to make sure that the food that I'm cooking, one, is very well presented, but I always cook with the freshest ingredients that I can get because there is a taste difference. There is a significant difference. And for people that don't know, when you were talking about eggs and how eggs are actually produced differently, in other countries, most countries don't refrigerate their eggs.
Right.
In the US, we have to refrigerate them because of the process that chickens, one, go through and the pesticides, and it's just the egg itself isn't as shelf stable, let's say, but without all the preservatives, so we have to put them in the refrigerator and things like that. But yeah, you go to Europe and yeah, I love European food. When I was in Paris and just the various places I've traveled to in Europe, everything's amazing. But when I travel to different countries, food is just better in general.
Well, you mentioned something about fresh food, and the concept of fresh food is also something that I talk about in my yogi diet workshops. In Ayurveda, we have a term called sattvic, Sattvic. Sattvic is often translated as pure, but what to me it's pure and balanced, but it's balanced in that it does not aggravate your constitutions. From an Ayurvedic perspective, we have doshas, and we don't want to aggravate the doshas. So, as an example that I think everybody can pretty much understand, coffee aggravates the dosha. It's an amphetamine. Let's face it. I used to self medicate because I was sluggish. So I would take coffee. That was my amphetamine. And then alcohol is your depressant. So many people self-medicate because they feel that they're too much like this, so they take alcohol to calm them down. So from an Ayurvedic perspective, a sattvic diet and lifestyle is void of whatever, is going to kind of get you like this or knock you out. Now, I've got to say, I was a bartender in the United States and in South America before I was 21 years old. And I did this all legally. But I also learned before I was 21 that if I drank too much, and too much for me was like nothing, but it would knock me out.
Yeah.
And so I stopped drinking very early in my life.
Um, excuse me. I've been, like, super congested lately, it's so crazy. But what exactly is a dosha?
A dosha is translated in English to constitution. From an Ayurvedic perspective, and keep in mind that Ayurveda is 5,000 years old, and in India and in the United States, but in other places, an Ayurvedic doctor is like an MD. They go through medical school, they go all through all the training that a normal Western doctor goes through, but it focuses on Ayurveda, which is um, it's much, as I mentioned, it's a life science, and it focuses more on well-being and preventing illness. And so that's why one of the chapters in my book, an entire chapter, is all about Ayurveda. And the concept that I talk about in my book about Ayurveda is about how your digestive system regulates your entire well-being. If our digestive fire, kind of like your engine, if your digestive fire is too weak or works too hard, then aside from belly aches and aside from gas or, whatever, it's going to affect your entire physical and emotional well-being. And what's fascinating is that even though this concept is 5,000 years old, we now, from a modern medical standpoint, are confirming it when we read all about the gut microbiome. And so I quote an expert, a gastroenterologist, a modern day gastroenterologist, who talks all about the gut microbiome and how, again, the gut is the center for your well being. And Hippocrates, of course, the father of modern medicine, also said, um, I have his quotes in my book, but it's something like, oh my God, eat to live, live to eat. I can't remember what it is, but I have two different quotes in my book from Hippocrates that is basically saying that your gut is your first line of defense and you have to take care of the gut. So going back to the doshas, you'd asked about the doshas, we have different kinds of constitutions. We are conceived with a, a variable constitution. And then every day, every hour, it's changing because we're always in a state of flux. So, as a perfect example, when I wake up in the morning, I like to wake up early and I wake up with tons of energy. Other people need coffee to wake up. So, it can be because of your dosha. But what I will say from a doshic perspective, where everyone is the same, and this is a problem with some people's lifestyles, is our digestive fire is strongest between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Now, in some countries and cultures, the biggest meal of the day is in that time frame. I lived in Mexico and lunch was the biggest meal. And then after lunch, you went home and took a siesta. And then for dinner, we would have maybe a hot drink, not coffee, non-caffeinated. We would have a hot caffeinated, non-caffeinated drink, and maybe a piece of bread, or something. If you know what pan dulce is, maybe like a
Mhm.
something very light. That was our dinner. That is perfect for how our Ayurvedic digestive fires are.
Wow. So, can you give us a really quick example for somebody that maybe they just want to start getting started with balancing out their gut biome? Because when I was in medical laboratory science school, it's a mouthful, we talked a lot about memory cells and how important it is to keep your gut health in a positive state. So, for somebody that's just getting started into this, what can they look forward to that's in your book that you offer?
Well, again, one of the chapters in my book, it's called "Go with the Gut," and I try to make everything simple in my book. So I highlight my guru and I highlight their personal experiences, and then their teachings, and then 5 easy tips from the guru. And then I weave in my personal experiences. I was diagnosed with digestive disorders when I was an adolescent. And so then I will weave in my experience, my firsthand testimonies, and then clinical research to back it up. And then the end of every chapter is a give it a try section where I give recommendations. But I will read to you right now Dr. Vishnu, that's my teacher in India, Dr. Vishnu's 5 easy tips. 1, don't eat at night. Maintain at least a 3-hour window before your last meal and bedtime to help digestion and sleep. Number 2, and there's more, but I'm just going to go quickly. Number 2, drink warm water. This kills me. I live in Texas, and people have they have a ton of ice in everything they do. I studied Italian when I was in high school. I've studied Italian a lot, and I can read Italian, and I can try to speak. But what I learned when I was in high school in Italian class is that in Italy nobody uses ice. And in
Really?
Mexico, and I saw that in Mexico when I lived in Mexico, people, if you ordered a drink, they would say, "Do you want it room temperature or cold?" So that drives me crazy. So, want to drink warm water to aid digestion. And I was once a host with a group of journalists from mainland China in Texas, and I took them out to a really fancy restaurant. And after dinner, they all ordered just hot water, and they just drank the water hot, with nothing in it. Number 3, this kind of goes to what you were talking about at the beginning. Eat wholesome, homemade dishes as much as possible. Avoid pre cooked and reheated foods that disturb the body's pH balance. Number 4, and this is to explain, I talked about foods that are aggravating and foods that are kind of like depressive. So this refers to the ones that are I call depressive. Restrict or skip fermented foods such as vinegar, tamari, and alcohol. And then 5, hey, this is something everyone needs to work on every day. Minimize external stressors.
Mm. Yeah, that last one can be challenging for a lot of people. I know for me, it took me a while to get rid of the stressors. Not to say that I don't get stressed out because I'm human, but yeah, just minimizing the internal stressors can be a bit of a challenge. We're gonna take a really quick commercial break, but there's something I really want to dive into. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So, before we left, there was a thought that I had that I felt was really important that you touched on, which is not eating a lot of foods that are reheated. And I think that a lot of us, especially here in America, we tend to just throw things in the microwave and we keep leftovers for days and sometimes, a week, week and a half. And that just isn't good for you. Is there anything in the Vedas that talk about why that isn't?
Well, I'm not sure about from the Vedas, but what I was taught at one of the ashrams, which follows Ayurvedic rules, is that if you don't want to waste food, and especially food that is cooked with love and wholesome organic food, you don't want to waste it. So I was taught at this one ashram, it was okay to, after you had your fresh homemade meal, to put it in the refrigerator and eat it, reheat it once. So the rule that we had there was reheat once only. Um, so, I mean, basically, the idea first about cooking, and a lot of people are into raw diets. From an Ayurvedic perspective, I do not follow a raw diet because it's not right for my dosha. For some people, that's fine, but I have to have cooked foods.
How do you know?
Oh, great question. And I talk about it in my book. I was trained to be able to look at people, watch how they move, watch how their body language, listen to their voice, and to be able to guess based on that. I also, in my yogic diet workshop, I give everyone a checklist, like a self test, that is for directional use only. Doctors, Ayurvedic doctors, will do pulse testing, very similar to traditional Chinese medicine, where an acupuncturist will do a pulse test. They can also look at your tongue and get a lot of clues from your tongue, but the pulse test is the only official way. And I am not trained in pulse testing because I'm not an Ayurvedic doctor.
Interesting. You mentioned traditional Chinese medicine, and that was something that popped in my head earlier, and more so from the perspective of any ideas on why Western medicine doesn't teach more holistic practices?
I have my thoughts. I've worked in the marketing field my entire life, which is a long life. And I've done a lot of work for pharmaceutical companies and for other health related um, clients. Um, and I do know that there is a lot of marketing that is done too often by the pharmaceutical companies to the medical profession. There are laws where you can't do certain things in terms of marketing from a health related standpoint, but of course the pharmaceutical companies, they know how to get around it. And the pharmaceutical companies have so much money and they make so much money with all of the drugs that they sell. From an Ayurvedic perspective, we do take drugs, but they're not drugs, they're herbs. And I visited, when I was studying Ayurveda in India, I visited an Ayurvedic hospital that had their own garden where they grew all of their own herbs. And I saw them make their own medicine, crushing and grinding and everything. But again, that's all natural products. I would, well, I know that in India anyway, all of those Ayurvedic supplements or herbs are very inexpensive. Now, we are starting to see some of them here in the United States, and I will give the name of one. One is called ashwagandha, and you can buy it at any grocery store, at any farm, like a non over the counter at a pharmacy. And for a month's supply, it's typically $20, $30 for a month's supply. Keep in mind that usually is in a capsule form. And Ayurveda says that we first absorb anything, whether it's the benefits of an herb or our food, in the mouth before we swallow with our saliva. If we pop a pill, we're not getting that benefit. So I buy my ashwagandha in powder. And there is a very reputable source in the United States where you can buy, a pound of it. But when I'm in India, I'll buy a kilo of it. It looks just like cocaine. But, you take it a couple times a day. And I have it right now. I'm drinking protein powder, hot. I have everything hot, right? I have to have everything hot. So even though I'm in Texas, I'm drinking hot water with protein powder and ashwagandha.
Wow, I actually love ashwagandha, and it's done miracles for me. When I started getting more into the holistic diet, maybe that's a couple years ago now. And not to say that I'm vegetarian or vegan or anything, but my body is pushing me towards that. So I just need to listen to my body, is what it
And I
is.
can definitely tell you where to get it in powder from the best, highly reputable source in the United States.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Where is that?
It's Banyan, Banyan, Banyan Botanicals, and you can buy it online and they ship it. But they're, I think, in your part of the country.
Oh, wow. I have to go look them up. But we only have about a minute or so left. Is there anything you want to leave with the audience before we go?
Well, the main concept of my book, From the Boxing Ring to the Ashram, is providing really simple things you can do in 10 minutes a day or less for optimal health and happiness. So, one example is sing every single day, dance every single day, laugh every single day, smile every single day, and have a gratitude practice every single day.
Wow, that is wonderful. Thank you, Deborah, so much for coming on. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode. I hope you all go check out her book. I'm really excited to read it myself because I've been wanting to get more into that Ayurveda. I'm going to learn how to say that word properly eventually. And everyone have a great one. Bye.